everyone. Welcome to our flipped version of our news piece of our agenda for our October 9th AIG meeting. As we said at the beginning of the year, we wanted to protect our planning time as much as possible, so here we are, and hopefully this will give us a brief chance to run through some of the businessy type stuff that we just need to take care of. So when you get a chance to watch this, if you have any questions, you know how to get up with Michelle or I. If you need some clarification, just let us know. So we are just going to do over here in our agenda the very top part, the news piece of the agenda. So the rest of this we'll take care of while we are together on Friday. So let's hit that first item right off the bat here, and that had to do with transmitting private information. In our case, it would be personally identifiable information for students. There was a time that I was much better about this, and I am certainly raising my hand and saying I've gotten lax about this. And so this is just a chance for all of us to kind of hit the reset button and say, all right, let's get back to best practices when it comes to emailing information, especially information that contains student and I would include parent identifiable information in it. So this certainly has not come up because somebody raised an issue. It literally came out of a school counselor newsletter where they shared this document that was produced by DPI a couple of years ago. So this document outlines all the whys and the hows, but we can summarize that pretty briefly, and you will have a copy of this in our Edmodo group. It deals with FERPA and the federal, the Records Protection Act, as well as just encrypting information and why we do that for students. So the short of this is to say we in AIG will not send any emails that contain student names. Even first initial and last name, it's too easy to identify because all you need to do is figure out the rest of that kid's information. So again, this is not to point the finger at anyone. I have done it recently and I know I need to do better. So we did a quick bit of research in terms of how we could password protect or encrypt our documents if we're sending information, because we can't always be at every school. We can't always get to every school and share with them that we need a file about this student. So we're just going to create a relatively brief way to take care of that. And so moving our document over here on the page now, again, this will be in our Edmodo group. So basically, in order to add a password to a document, all that we have to do is, once we're in Word, follow these few steps. So which is basically to click the little Microsoft Office button in the top left corner. You scroll down to where it says Prepare, and when that breaks out, you'll see an option for Encrypt Document. And really all you're going to do at that point is it adds a password to whatever you save. And so the steps go on here. It's just a one-pager, and again, this is you can print this off and put it with your just things to remember. So you put in a password and you confirm it. Now, for our sake, and I did not put this on the document on purpose, because this information will be out there for anyone, but we will talk about what the password will be. It will be unique to each of us, and that way we will know what the passwords are, and you can share that with school counselors if you're asking them for records or sending them a list. But this will help us. So if you're sending an email, you can put in the body of the email, please see the attached password protected document for information about students that we need say folder information on, or these students have recently been added to the AIG population at your school, those kind of things. But we would put all the student information in the password protected document. It is one more step, but the reason for that one step is to protect the student information in light that anyone could hack into a system at any time. So there's no perfect protection, but this does at least make it so that no one would have access to names without those passwords. So we'll talk about what the passwords will be on Friday when we're together, but use this step if you're sending student information to a counselor, to one another, to Michelle or I, anytime you're passing it around. And if you notice that other people are sending student information in emails, some people don't think this is a big deal. It's one of those things we just have to get in compliance with. So we will do our fair share of that. And again, if you have questions about that, just let Michelle or I know. So that is the first thing on our agenda, which was looking at email and personal identifiable information. The next thing has to do with, and it's for us, it's AIG testing season, especially for our 4th and 5th graders that may have tested in the past or that might be new to us. And so with that has come up an issue that certainly has appeared in the past for us. And so we're going to try to fix some concerns we have with what happens when we go out and do testing. Now, Tanya and Leanne do 90+% of our AIG testing, and that was on purpose several years ago. For those of you who've been around for a while, that was so that those of you in specialist roles were not having to give up classroom time to do testing. So we had collected some data from our specialists at that time, and we found out that a lot of folks were having to spend an inordinate amount of time testing. And so we did a little time analysis piece, and we figured out that if we put 2 people in those positions, we could probably get away from anybody having to do testing. And so that has worked out really well for us. It's also helped us to be more consistent in our practice. So that is all great. However, there are 2 things that we need to ask of all of you. And that is, first, when you're setting up the testing environment, and that is the responsibility of the person at the school. The specialists that are coming in to test, they're assuming that they're walking into a ready-to-go testing environment. Now, they're also, Tanya and Leanne know that it's a flexible, moving target, but they're trusting that you have secured a space and that space is appropriate for AIG testing. That means it's not, for example, some things that we've seen, not next door to the music room where maybe they're practicing recorders, or it's not next door to the cafeteria or in the cafeteria. So some of those kind of things have happened, and that puts our kids at a disadvantage when they're testing, and it certainly isn't the testing environment we want to give them. So one of your responsibilities as the AIG specialist is to make sure that a testing environment is there and available. So in some schools that's easier than others, but what we need you to do in advance is you're going to identify what the space is going to be for AIG testing, and then let the administration know if that space is appropriate or inappropriate for testing. So if you have a concern that this space is inappropriate and you've let the administration know that it's the only space that's going to be available, then that's where Michelle or I need to know. That you have talked to the administration and that there's no other space available for testing, and then we're going to have to figure something out at that point, because our kids deserve a fair testing environment. Then, so once you know where the environment is going to be, and you've let Tanya and Leanne know, and I think they ask for 7 to 10 days in advance, which is still pretty close to testing, you've let them know how many kids are testing, please honor that number. So they are going to prepare answer sheets, they're going to prepare a number of test booklets they bring, number of pencils, all that stuff. So if you tell them, hey, we have 10 kids to test, and then they show up and there's 15, that creates a really scrambled environment for them whenever they've got to come up with those extra test books. So let your teachers know if they're referring somebody for testing, do that far enough in advance that that you have the names and you can let Tanya and Leanne know this is when testing is going to happen. So we've gotten pretty clear with when testing windows are happening at each school, and you may know that you don't have Johnny's form yet, but if you feel pretty confident that Johnny's going to be bringing that form in and he'll be able to be tested by the time Tanya or Leanne comes to do the testing, put them in your count. Okay, so don't say, well, I didn't have the form, so I couldn't count them. count them, and then if it turns out that there's 13 instead of 14, that's better than that there's 14 instead of 10. So honor your count, and so that way that Tanya and Leanne know how many kids they're coming into. Then the final and third part of this testing update has to do with, so what happens when something abnormal happens during a testing environment? You know, in the EOGs, we have irregularity reports and we have misadministration reports. We're really at a tricky spot in AIG, as you well know, because if we're giving an ITBS or a COGAT, there's, other than putting the kids online, which is an additional expense for us, we don't have a fallback. So if we have 10 kids who go through a testing cycle and there's a misadministration or something really dramatic happens, that ends up costing us financially and in time to give them a different test, and it costs those kids a chance or the time to go take another test. So Tanya, Leanne, Michelle, and I have been working, and as well as Barbara and Elizabeth, have been working on a report that would go to administration. So following a testing cycle, or a testing day, I should say, if a problem occurs, so there's kids banging pots and pans or something in the hallway, a teacher's yelling and screaming next door, whatever is going on, there's a fire drill. We try to create a short form that Tanya and Leanne would create. You would sign off on it, that you understand that this happened, and then it would go to administration, and Michelle and I would get a copy. So anything can happen, and weird things happen during testing, and sometimes they're not within our control. But I think we can do a little bit better. Like I said, the first point being making sure that the environment is appropriate for testing, and then documenting if something happens that it's not. So as we say at the end of this note, we feel that everybody really wants to make sure that the testing environment is protected for our kids. But we also feel like up till now, we haven't had a way to document that this has happened and that it's happened once or twice, or it happens every time we're testing. So we're hoping that builds a little bit of a level of accountability into what we're doing. So this form, again, is in your Edmodo group. You probably, as a specialist, won't need to use it, except that we'll probably ask that you initial off on that form if one ever has to be filled out. So again, it's not the most happy thing to talk about, but at least get us all on the same page. And that brings us to a resource that was sent to you. So while this is changing screens for me, this summer one of our planning teams met and they requested the hands-on equations verbal problems resource, and so we have sent that to you. So hopefully that has arrived to you at one of your schools in the courier. Just do yourself a favor, mark it as purchased with AIG funds if it's not already marked like that, and that way you know where it came from. We did only purchase one for each specialist instead of one per school, mainly because we feel like you guys are the ones using that resource. But do make sure if you didn't get that, I wanted to make sure we had that on the agenda so you could say, mine didn't come. That brings us to Duke Tip as the next thing on our agenda. So hopefully each of you or someone at your school received the 4th to 6th grade talent search information. I won't read all this information to you. Those of you who are new to AIG, you may want to talk to some of us, some of your colleagues here. Duke Tip requires that the student has a 95 percentile on a test that's been administered to them. So these would be 4th graders who took the EOG last year. You may want to ask your data specialist for a list of those kids, and there's a whole packet of information in there from Duke Tip, but do take a chance to read through that. It's one of those extra things that's available for our high-achieving kids, and if our parents don't hear about it, then they don't know whether or not they want to take part in it. We do say, we don't typically pay anything for Duke Tip, or we don't send kids there, but a fair number of our kids end up going there, or do the online part anyway, and get those resources. All right, so we're almost there. Couple more things on our agenda here. So we're down to the EVOS part of this. Last week, Michelle and I were able to pull EVOS reports. So I'm leaving the school names off of the screen here, but this report that you're looking at now is math. And so these are all of our 5th grade math results. So we may or may not have time to dive into this Friday, but if you haven't looked at your school's EVOS results for math and reading, especially sorted by AIG, because again, this is the report you're looking at here is our gifted students only. Oops. Hopefully I didn't just lose everybody there. All right, so I don't know if I just lost you there for a second, but I think we're back. So this has been sorted out by our AIG kids. And again, this is just 5th grade. There's a 4th grade report too, but we won't go through all those. This is 5th grade, and this is math, right? So your school is obviously located on here, somewhere along the way. The top line, so if let's just pull down to a random school here. Let's pick one of these ones in the middle. So if we were to look at the school here, it's pink and then green. Get my pen back. If we were to look at this school, give it a second to load up for us here. Oh, there we go, we're back. Okay, so if we were to look at this school here, lost pen again. There, oh, look at that. That's a faint line, sorry about that. If we were to look at the top line, the minus 7.0 that you see there in the pink, that would be kids who scored at a level 5. So these are kids who are doing fine. They're level 5 in terms of proficiency, right? But the minus 7 and the fact that it's in red, what the red tells us is that there is moderate evidence that the group did not meet growth. Now that's for this year. The line underneath it, the green one, the 0.7, since it's in green, that means that there's evidence last year. So that would have been the previous cohort of 5th graders, those kids who are now in 6th grade. Or actually, they would now be in, they would have moved on to 6th grade. The previous cohort, they actually did meet growth. So something happened where 13 kids in the previous group met growth, but then in the past year, they were way off or it doesn't look like they have met growth. We know from one group of kids to the next that can bounce back and forth, and trends are much better to look at than any individual piece of data. However, when you're looking at your school's data, if you see something where it's red and red, then that's a concern, right? That's 2 years in a row that kids have not met growth, or in some of these cases haven't met it by quite a bit. The fact that some kids do make a lot of growth and some kids don't tends to point to the thought that there is room there to grow. Most of our kids are not at 99th percentile. There are a few, and it may be a little bit harder for them because they can't miss many questions from one to the next, but the amount that those kids need to grow is less than the kids who are lower on the scale. So we've gone through that before, but we certainly want to dissuade anyone from thinking that high kids can't grow, because they can. They don't have to grow as much. So this is our math report. I'm just scrolling through it here. The ones that just have the numbers on them, obviously those are cases where there weren't enough kids to count there. So we can see our results from last year and from the year before. We've got some work to do in math, I think, and I think a lot of you have said that in the past. If we pull up our reading results, let me grab that here real quick, 5th grade reading, you switch over there. Again, we notice that all of our AIG kids are proficient, right? Well, most all. There's a few stragglers. So even our kids that aren't, maybe these are reading now, even our kids who aren't gifted in reading, the vast majority of them are still scoring level 4 and 5 in reading, right, and in math. You have these few that you'll see the ones over here under level 2 or level 3. But most of our kids are doing pretty well there. However, when we get to reading, we start to notice some things with the data, right? We don't see nearly as many in the level 5 category. We see an awful lot in level 4. But the good news is we see a lot of green and a lot of blue. So they're not scoring as high, perhaps, might be one interpretation. However, but they do seem to be making growth, especially last year. So we always you have to pull your data to be more specific. But it's an interesting dynamic. So our math kids are scoring higher, but not making growth, and our reading kids are scoring a little lower, but making good growth. So we've got some discussions there. There's some good PLC discussions as we continue to move forward. So that's kind of our EVOS update for this month. That brings us down to our multi-tier system of support, or MTSS. And I know in our instructional support teams, most of our teams have been looking at MTSS and defining the core curriculum. So right now, that's where I am too, is both looking with schools at their core curriculum and also kind of thinking ahead for our AIG services and where MTSS fits in there. And we've had a little bit of that discussion as a team. I look forward to having more of that discussion, because I do believe that's going to drive a lot of our next strategic plan, is looking at which of our gifted kids are identified and receive enough service to meet their needs in the classroom, which ones are at that tier 2 and they need moderate support, and then which ones are at tier 3 and they need a significant level of support. That could change some things for us in terms of how we deliver services moving forward a little bit, but we certainly want to have that discussion with you and have your input into that as well. So MTSS, we really want to keep gifted kids in that conversation, especially on the instructional intervention side of things. That how are we intervening, and what is the core curriculum those kids are getting? How are we demonstrating that they are already proficient with that core curriculum and can move forward? So lots for all of us to learn, and thankful that we have all of us to get through that part of it together. And that brings us to really the last piece of what we wanted to chat about today. I have not been in Power School, and I don't believe Michelle has lately, to enter new students. So hopefully very soon we will get everybody's kids that have been testing recently, and really probably testing since this summer, into your Power School reports, and then we can run that district report and get everybody rechecking. One thing that has been happening across the state, this is certainly not unique to us, is that kids moving into the LEA or moving into Onslow County from another LEA or another school, sometimes they're showing up, sometimes they're not. So the Power School folks are working on that, as well as many other things. But one of the reports that Power School, at the request of AIG, has created is this report. It's a standalone report, and it's AIG students from another LEA. So what this report does, just to give you a broad overview, is, I'm going to scroll down here just so you can see it a little better. What this report does is says, oh, this student, so Sally had an AIG program at her previous school. However, the program is then looking at us in Onslow County and saying, but I don't see anything in Onslow County. That should automatically happen, but for some reason it's not for all students. So when kids move in, we've got to check and make sure that who has been identified before, and now for some reason they're not showing up in our LEA. So it's kind of where we were before, except now we can run a report. And what the report does is, by the school, so it'll run you the list, and these 7 kids have been added, and they had an AIG report in the other school, but they don't now. And then we can look at those records, and again, we're back to looking at their files and determining what standards they meet and what their area of identification would be. So this is one that's under state standalone reports. I'm going to guess that a lot of you don't have access to that report. We're going to work on that, but in the meantime, I will always say, Michelle or I can run that report for you, or or your data manager can run that report. However, you're probably going to need to give them this printout, because I don't know that they have had to run this report ever in the past. So this is in Edmodo, so you can download this. It's under the state standalone reports, and it's called AIG Students from another LEA, and the highlight here on the page kind of tells them how to get there. If you can get there, by all means, go ahead and do it, but I don't know that if your level of access will give you that access. So hopefully, there you go. So anyway, this is all that information on that handout. So I'm going to jump out of this one and say, hopefully this 25 minutes or so has saved us 25 minutes for Friday. And if there's other business items, hopefully those will be quick ones. We knew these were kind of meaty and were going to take us a few minutes. So hopefully this format works for you, and hopefully it's something that will keep us focused during our time together and allow us to spend more time doing some of the pieces that are a little bit more important while we're together, like planning and really looking at how we use some of our resources. So we look forward to seeing you on Friday. If you're watching this after Friday, it was good to see you on Friday. So we will talk to you soon, and have a great day.